The point of DevGrid is to create this intelligence layer, this AI native graph that sees the whole ecosystem and gives you this nice portal to then see the statistics and the scores and all those different things. But it's not just that. Now we've got all this information. How do we meet the individuals where they're at? And that's more and more becoming an agentic thing. It's a real boon for our user base and getting really good feedback.
They know it's complicated. They know the ecosystems are hard and complicated, but I don't think quite enough people understand why. What are the nuances to things? Given the mess and the complications of software engineering, these agents can now pull all that together and simplify your posture footprint. You can now throw this MCP tool at an agent, and it's going to put it all together in a few minutes to say, here's everything that you have. We're back.
Awesome. So today's a fun one. They're always a fun one, of course. But today we get to talk about sort of an announcement, sort of a topical one, right? We've just launched in the last few days our new DevGrid MCP server. We're super excited about it. Going to talk about it a little bit, show the docs off a little bit, and share about the update with the product and how our customers are using it. You did a lot of the work, and
this was a fun one.
You want to talk about it?
It was interesting. I learned a lot about how MCP servers work. The authentication itself was a totally new shift for me. I've been an API guy for my entire career, and then how do we do auth? Get a token, pass it in. It's not quite that easy because the agent is more involved now in making decisions, and you have to tell it how to do auth in a way. And so you've got to build your authentication a little bit more, I don't want to say robust authentication, but a little bit different so that you're giving the consuming agent, well, here's the endpoints for auth, here's the spec, here's the schema of our auth, here's where you go, here's where you redirect the user to, and then come back. It's more of a fire and forget for the agent because you redirect, you come back, and it's done. And that's it. And they store the token in their own context so that you don't have to do anything else except for maybe do a refresh token every now and again if the authentication expires. So that was a little bit different than what I'm used to, but very interesting on what you can implement behind the scenes of this and authenticate the user and give the hints to the agent. So this one was pretty fun. I had a lot of learnings and a lot of interesting tidbits coming from this one.
So I'm just showing the docs to folks, right? Like we've got it. It's on our doc site. There's a nice big MCP button up there. It's also buried within the tree as well. We've already started using MCP for a lot of different tools that we use, including now DevGrid. The point of DevGrid is to create this intelligence layer, right? Like this AI native graph that sees the whole ecosystem and then gives you this nice portal to then see the statistics and the scores and all those different things. But it's not just that. Now we've got all this information. How do we meet the individuals where they're at? And that's more and more becoming an agentic thing, right? So MCP was a big part of that, was how do we now provide these data sources to the agentic, either an assistant, right? Like you plug it into Claude Code or Cursor or Codex or whatever, or something more purely agentic where you have an asynchronous process that's happening. For example, you would go through, I remember I built a maintenance bot for one of our repos, right? It's just a pipeline basically, right? It just does like 70 checks of all these different things like NPM, outdated and stuff like that. But say you wanted to do that for vulnerabilities. Well, if you're in a big enterprise, doing that for vulnerabilities is a nightmare because typically you're going to have anywhere from 3 to 10 different scanning data sources. One of the cool things that we're now giving people the ability to do is say, okay, hey, DevGrid, this is the application that this repo is tied to. Have any vulnerabilities? Can you tell me what they are? Can you tell me the specs, the differences? Let me go pull it down. Where are they in the code base if you have that information? That can all happen asynchronously now. You could always do it. We had the APIs. We built that into our IDE extension so the developers can do it, sort of manually. MCP just makes it easier and easier to do that in a more purely asynchronous way. And it's very, very cool. Some of the powerful leveraging of the aggregation and the kind of normalization that we're doing for the user. So I think it's a real boon for our user base and we're getting really good feedback so far.
People know that software engineering is hard. They know it's complicated. They know the ecosystems are hard and complicated, but I don't think quite enough people understand why, or why is it complicated? What are the nuances to things? Now, given you can just pass in this server to your agent, this thing can start to traverse and it can start to look at this result set versus that result set, start to make connections. Well, this has this connection, this doesn't. And these tools are super, super powerful. We all know that already, but now given the mess and the complications of software engineering, these agents can now pull all that together and simplify your posture footprint by just calling these tools. But it's the why. Like, why do you care about this result set versus this join versus this thing? Somebody could piece that all together and create a report for that. Fine, that's easy. But the fact remains is you could put that in a report. You could create a Power BI dashboard. You could do all this and this and put this information together. And it's going to take you 2 years and $1 million to do that. But you can now throw this MCP tool at an agent and it's going to put it all together in a few minutes to say, here's everything that you have. But the great thing is, and this is something I learned about when creating the server, is that you give the agent hints in the MCP definition. You say, this is what this tool set returns, and this is how it might connect to something else. And this is how that might connect to something else. You can give it prompt hints in a way of why one data set relates to another. So it can then pull all the tools and say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to start looking at your components and looking at your vulnerabilities and looking at the journey runs and doing all this. Now, it can then piece all that information together in a quick summary. So you can just say, summarize by posture. It'll go spin everything off. And within a few minutes, you've got a robust report on where everything you sit. But also, it can do the comparisons. We can say, app A, app B, here's your gaps, here's what you're missing. And it's super, super powerful just to give it to an agent now instead of just relying on APIs. It can build a lot. I was hugely impressed with what it can do now.
One of the things that you can do with DevGrid is effectively define what it means to be good. You can look at things like MTTR or change failure or defects and vulnerability SLAs, whatever it is. In a large enterprise, the things that get you in the red, yellow, green, or the naughty list, or whatever you call it, right? What some of these flows allow you to do now is basically you can really just sort of talk to it and say, what do I need to do to get out of red? Literally, what's the scoring differential? Well, you're at a 50, you need to get to a 70 to get to yellow. Well, what's my quickest path to get 20 points? Is like 0 out of 30 of end of life issues or vulnerabilities. If you can close these 5 vulnerabilities, your score will go up by 20 points and you'll be in yellow. Cool. Okay, can you work on those vulnerabilities for me? Yeah, sure, let's do that. Let's pull down the vulnerabilities. We know which ones they are, and the thing starts working. That type of workflow is now becoming available. Forget tickets. Like, who needs tickets? I mean, you still need tickets for all the paperwork. But in terms of the process of what do I need to do? What's important? How do I move the needle? All that stuff starts to get easier once you start having these tools. Obviously, we're still working with folks on it, and we're going to keep adding stuff to it. Again, you go through the docs. It's pretty representative of our APIs. It's not 100%. And then there's other use cases, to your point, hints and maybe aggregation endpoints and some of those things where we might start to do a little more because it is a different use case than our REST APIs, right? Like REST APIs are very cruddy. They're very like retrieve and update stuff.
Yeah, they're definite by design. They do a task, they do a reading results back, but they don't tell why or how one data set is connected to another. You have to put that in the human brain or the documentation and pass that all into the agent if you want it to start consuming your API. Some people don't realize in an enterprise, you might have an executive or you might have a senior manager who's asking, what's the status of this application? What's the status of this, of that? They ask their direct report, who asked theirs, who asked the team, who asked somebody else. And now you've got this stack of 5 people who are involved in just giving a status of something. Whereas now with this server, you can just ask your agent, what's the status of this? Oh, that was done in commit here and it was commit here. And here's the change record for that. And that's going to production on Wednesday. So that whole 3 or 4 hour exercise of burning people's time is now shrunk down to 5 minutes because we have all that data connected together in our ecosystem. And that's where I think there's a lot of power in giving to people and putting into people's hands of saying how that all connects now, because that's where the complicated parts are. What is the status of a commit? Well, that's not the question you're asking. You're asking what's the status of a fix, but that really boils down to a commit. And it just takes a long time to put that answer together at times. And 15 minutes of context loss of a developer shifting away to give you a status report, you've just burned an hour of work time for just getting a status report from a single developer. Now you can have that same answer in 5 minutes and 0 productivity loss. That's where the true power is coming in with this.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, we've talked about this before, right? Like, and this is one of the things where we're building, like I said, our own agent. One of the things we're building our own agents for is exactly this chat thing, right? Because not every company is going to have Claude Chat or Codex or whatever. Like some of our customers, they'll never be allowed to use a tool like that and have their data flow through a tool like that. It's just never going to happen. So we want to enable the people that do, but a lot of our customers aren't going to. So we have to sort of provide our own version of that to them. And then, of course, because we have the full context of the harness, we can do a little bit more. I know there's a lot of execs, to your point, that don't ask questions because of the overwhelming cost of a question. And, you know, I've worked with these guys and gals for years and work closely with them. You know, you got hundreds or thousands of people working for you. Every time you ask a question, the ripple effects of that are wild, right? You just want some data. You want some information. You want to know what's going on here or there or whatever. It's extremely expensive. It causes all kinds of political drama. Why are they asking for this? How does it look? So it's like, it goes to your point, it goes through the chain. If you're lucky, it's very like, what's the status of this thing? And it's small and it's literally just an information transfer. That's actually not usually the full extent of it, right? There's an information transfer and there's an information sanitization and narrative generation and testing that against other narratives. And like, there's all this swirl that goes through the organization as a result of all that, versus that same exec can ping Teams app or something like that and ask that same question. Did this vulnerability get fixed? Did they close the vulnerabilities they were going to close? Did this happen? Yada, yada, yada. And the system can go and look and know some context because like, hey, this guy asked me this last week. I know the thing they're talking about. And then kind of come back and be like, yeah, that's closed. That's good. They've moved on to this. I mean, obviously that's never going to be perfect. Our early tests are very interesting. We're working on that with some people. And then there's also people have internal tools. It's another reason why MCP was so important. Some of the places we've worked before or working with customers or prospects, they've built their own internal AI platforms sitting on top of the model providers, type of banks that I'm used to working with and you're used to working with. You're not going to let people just have a chat GPT or...
No, it's too risky. You don't know what's going out there. You don't know what your data is being trained on. It's a big, big no-no to put any data in there because the fear of that getting leaked or keys getting leaked or code getting leaked or some sensitive information going on.
Even us, right? Like we were we had a very intense conversation with the whole team as we were rolling this MCP out and we made it ready in production. We were like, now, like, because we got people that are like forward deployed engineers, they're logging into customer accounts and stuff like that. This cannot be set up with any of these tools. Because again, what happens is if I set up the MCP server and authenticate with a customer account, Claude or whomever is now talking to our data, sending the customer's data to that tool. That cannot happen. We put some guardrails in place organizationally and all those different things and made sure everybody understood why that can't happen and then the things that we wanted to do to prevent that from happening. It's a wild thing. You know, everybody in the startup world gets to use the tools that they think are best. There's actually a really interesting article. Somebody did a research project that actually really confirmed a lot of these enterprise concerns in terms of the amount of use that the model providers, you know, the lab companies, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or whomever, is using your data as you use the tool. It was funny. The day after I saw that article, Anthropic also put out a big thing where they're giving away $500 a month max plus something or max 20 or whatever it was. I forget exactly, to anybody who's doing open source development. And I was like, that's interesting. On the one hand, it looks, they're giving back to the open source community. And it's like, yeah, that's not really what they're doing. They're offering you free electricity so they can suck the genius out of your brain. So they can watch how a world-class open source developer does their work all the way through.
You have to opt out of that stuff a lot of times. Because they're going to do it by default. That was and
I don't believe them. Like, come on. Do you really believe them? Even if you opt out, I don't believe they're not using it.
In some way, shape, or form, they're using it. And I even saw something, Meta is doing the same thing with some of their glasses, and people were opting inadvertently, or some of the images were being reviewed of, they left their camera running. They've got some people offshore who are reviewing these images of their spouses in a very,
it's all very compromised in privacy.
Compromised state,
issues.
yes.
Like
So I think the only way to avoid a lot of that is to use some of the walled garden models in Bedrock, for example, because that doesn't leave the system. You know, we've been leaning into is using the Bedrock instead of the platforms directly because that just eliminates the risk of the data being trained.
Yeah, I mean, we would never, with our customer base, that's been a hard rule that we've had since the beginning, because if we ever had customer data run through, call it OpenAI's APIs, they'd kick us to the curb. Right? Like we'd be done.
Immediately. That's a contract just done.
Yeah, they would never sign the deal with us. With the type of companies we're trying to help, the financial services, large enterprises, they just wouldn't tolerate it. That walled garden thing is going to become more and more important. Actually, that's why it's really interesting that OpenAI signed a deal with AWS recently
and they know that. They know that's the deal. They know that people aren't going to use them because of the fear of, but it's even not even the fear of the training, but it's also is leaving their VPC. And a lot of security postures are going to say, hey, it's outside the VPC. You can't use it. I don't care what it is. It's not leaving. Pulling that into AWS, that opens the door for a lot larger enterprise contracts that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
100%. I know that OpenAI still has some of exclusivity with Microsoft on the Azure stuff. That's why like the new deal that they just announced doesn't allow for a serverless approach. Basically, you can spin up a dedicated instance, which is not cheap, and we probably wouldn't do that unless you had a constant throughput, like if you're doing big batch jobs or something like that. But at least they're putting their foot in the door. But yeah, I'm surprised that there aren't more providers everywhere. OpenAI was a good example. Anthropic obviously has been on AWS for a while. Grok doesn't appear to be hostable anywhere, but you got to go through Grok. I think there's a couple other models.
They're still pretty early though. They're a small shop still. They've gotten a lot of revenue, they've gotten a lot of investment, but they haven't really gotten to the point where they can invest in expanding their footprint outside of their own platform.
Well, they're also very kind of consumer focused. Their focus is on like, hey, they've got all that X data, they can trade on that. It's much more kind of consumer use cases, what's going on in the world, the Grokpedia type stuff where they're synthesizing the internet for that type of stuff. They're less commercial use cases where it's like, hey, we're trying to make this business process work better or this information extraction.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to try to get there at some point because that's the big expansion. There's only so much in the consumer facing that you can get before you're just limited by the growth. There's just so much saturation with the models right now that their growth will be stagnated if they don't try to get into the more the enterprise space.
No, I agree. And I mean, it's also very interesting, all the politics around Anthropic and what's going on with the administration and the terms of use and all those different things. And that certainly opens a door to Grok to get into those use cases if they so chose. There's very much a line being drawn in the sand on that. So it's wild stuff. It's really interesting. But like I said, I mean, we're trying to bring it back to DevGrid a little bit, right? Like fundamentally what we're trying to provide to people, our mission, our vision is to get visibility, break down the barriers of the information within a large software enterprise.
Because you lose so much time with that complexity. There's a slog. In any enterprise, developers know there's a spin. It just happens with just taking so long to get information because you have to go to all these different places. You waste so much time. If we were just to measure, just put a clock on how much time is wasted on waiting for answers or just trying to get something that's going to take 14 people in a committee to give you an answer on, I would be shocked. I know it's bad, and I would still be shocked with that answer because it would be bad. Millions of dollars a year just be in that waiting for an answer.
It's overwhelmingly the amount of time being spent is on nonsense or things that are just friction. We want to reduce unproductive friction. There's sometimes friction that's put in on purpose. Okay, we're going to create an approval flow that's going to take 3 weeks just because we want to make sure money can't fly out the door fast. The fact that it's silly and slow and the same person has to touch it 3 times, that's a feature, not a bug. That's a philosophy. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand why that exists. But there's a lot that's just dumb that nobody would defend. It just is what it is. Where I'm excited about where we're going with the product because the AI stuff does really let us help with a lot of that. Like there's a lot of things that we can start to sand off the friction on. Nothing that's going to be like massively groundbreaking by itself, but taking an aggregate could be huge savings. We know organizations that employ teams of like 5 to 7 people just to deal with the paperwork nonsense of it all, right?
And it's just to put it into a place where developers need to understand what they need to do. You've got a whole job dedicated to the office space. I take the requirements and I bring it to somebody else. And I take this information, I shape it, and I give it to someone else. They don't do anything other than just consolidate information.
Which is valuable, but
it's valuable.
We can make it better.
Hey, those people who do that, who do it well, huge amount of respect for those individuals because it's hard to make sure that people can get a clear understanding of your posture, where it's missing and the deadlines and go talk to that person. And that's a lot. But it shouldn't have to exist in the first place.
One of those functions reported to me at one point. I mean, I really liked the guy. He was a super competent guy. Shout out to Nate, who was running it. And I remember saying something to him, and I don't remember exactly how I said it. Basically, I wanted him to understand that what would happen is people like that are doing exactly what you're talking about, they're solving breakdowns. They're like human pipe fixers. They're like, oh, this pipe needs to talk to this pipe. There's no way to do that. I'm going to stand in between and hold the 2 pipes and let the water flow through me or let the electricity flow through me so that it can sort itself out. So there'd be this heavy process that gets put in place and then work goes and then the problem's solved. I remember sitting there, we were talking through it and I said something, it was like, man, the thing we got to remember is every time we do one of these, although it's a win, we also need to recognize that it was actually a failure to even have to do it in the first place. How do we then take that and recognize, hey, your team had this win because they solved this problem, but how do we kill the problem in its infancy? It's another kind of hero ball in some ways, right? Like, and again, I'm not blaming him or that function. It's not their fault. But the point being that let's go to the root cause. Let's understand how this thing metastasized in the first place. And let's just do something that makes it healthy to not have to deal with it in the future, right? So that's how we're using these tools. It's been awesome to see.
Not just enterprises like this. There's other shops that have the same problem. Years back, I had an interview for a VP of engineering spot. This is a long time ago. He said, okay, this is a good role, but it's going to be all the stuff that nobody else wants. It's going to be all the compliance. It's going to be all this. It's going to be all the slog. And I said, you know what? Thanks, but no thanks. It's just, I don't want to deal with that. That's a lot that go on with keeping an app compliant, keeping a shop compliant. It's the compliance. SOC 2 is a big part of that, making sure that your TPS reports are done. Being able to automate even a fraction of that by way of talking to the bots is a huge lift.
Well, just what do I need to do? And this is another thing that's been interesting. I use this every day. I'll sit down with the bots and I've got my to-do list and I'll talk to Claude about my to-do list or talk to whatever. One of the cool things about using the AI tools for everything, not just code, there's this thing, I got to do this tax filing or whatever it is, right? And it's like, I don't know where to start. Like, I don't want to deal with this. So I just ask it, where do I start? And it outlines the problem for me. It gives me momentum to be like, all right, cool. I know what to do. Let me go do it. Right. Partially that's how I'm wired and it just helps me. But I think there's so many people in these big companies that like, they're just waiting to be told what to do because that's what they've been trained to be done. I know you and I both have talked about this many times. HR departments try to do like continued learning and all these different things. But when I look around, most leaders don't teach their teams how to think and teach their teams how to attack problems and how to anticipate problems and how to get ahead of it and how to create value and all those different things. Like, that's actually kind of a rare thing. So if we can start to help do that using these tools, be like, all right, what do I need to focus on? What are you talking about? Sprints are designed for that. Like, sure. Yes. But also at the next layer up, if you're an app manager, you actually help shape the sprint. There's all these other things going on. It's like, okay, what matters? Well, what are your goals? Well, my goals are to stay off the naughty list. Okay, great. Well, you've got 7 things that are going to hit your deadline in 2 weeks. You're going to be out of SLA. So you better get those squared away. That's a big thing.
I've talked to a lot of teams who just follow the sprint board. That's it. If it's on the sprint board, I do it. If it's not, I don't. They run their dependency updates as a sprint ticket with story pointing it. They run their vulnerability fixes through a sprint board and they story point it. And every little bit and nuance and task that has to be done to shape and to maintain an application, they put a ticket in there. And then they make their product owner run the board for story pointing it. There's no direct business value with that. There's indirect business value out of that, but those things should just happen. And I have a pretty strong stance on that should just happen in a given organization of, look, guys and girls, you know what needs to happen with keeping this up to date. Just do it. I'm not going to prioritize this work. Just do it. Bundle in part of your time with this. And they just forget. And that's where this is also very valuable. You kind of hinted to this already that what do I need to focus on? Well, you got to get your business value work done, but all the things that are to keep the application healthy, the portfolio healthy, well, we're just going to start doing that part of the work because this is here.
Do you have to put brushing your teeth on your to-do list?
Yeah, I tell my kids, like, get ready for bed. And they know getting ready for bed is brushing their teeth. It's getting their pajamas on. It's like, I'm not going to spell it out for you. And they ask me, do I have to brush my teeth? You're getting ready for bed. I don't give them an answer. These are the things that have to be done. But that's just so much forgotten in an organization because everybody just thinks about, I need to get the feature done. Well, yes, shipping business value is the most important thing, but you've got to do those other parts of keeping your application healthy because that's where it gets out of date. And that's where I really do feel strongly about this can just help you fix things and get that in front of your face while you're doing features. Hey, you got this feature done. While you're at it, just so you know, you've got this vulnerability SLA that's going to pop. Want to update your dependencies now? Yes, I do. And just done.
No, I agree with you. It's an interesting debate because on the one hand, you might say, hey, we want to put everything on the board. Like, don't be doing work that's not on the board. On the other, your point, like brushing my teeth, I'm going to get credit for brushing my teeth. It's like,
Yeah. Those things, it'll take you longer to put them on the board than it is just to run your update command. Update your dependencies. 9 times out of 10, that's going to fix your vulnerabilities.
Well, and if you do it constantly, it's not painful. Like we see it with some of our customers. Like, I'll tell you, man, like we'll go through some of these business reviews. I know you've seen some of these graphs, but like we'll look at a vulnerability graph, a vulnerability like lifetime graph for an application or a portfolio. One of the things we'll show them is like what's being open, what's being closed, and then kind of how the line grows. And you just watch it. 100 were opened, another 100 were open, and the line just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. It's like, guys, if you just had tackled it at that point, it's an hour a week or an hour a month, but you've let it metastasize.
Just run your update command. The vulnerabilities just tanked. We just not have them on the board. And they did. Oh, run the update. We're done. Oh, we got to update this one thing. Done.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some stuff that's going to come up and you're going to have
there's some
that are
things
painful,
with backwards compatibility.
But most of them are just, just do the basic thing. And literally they just get into the tens of thousands of millions of vulnerabilities. And you're just like, guys.
Yeah, do you want to brush your teeth every day? Or do you want to go to the dentist to get a root canal every year? Or 2 root canals a year, or cavities filled because you're not brushing your teeth. Do I need to prioritize? No, just do it.
I do have some sympathy. Like speaking for a place that we used to work, there were some guys in one line of business where they had 2 major projects that they had to get done on a crunch time. Then they had some vulnerabilities pop in their underlying Java framework that they were using that were bad. It was stuff that it was going to be really hard to fix without just kind of doing a major upgrade, which is almost like a full rewrite. And so it's like those types of things you do have to account for. Like, okay, fine. there's a lot of legacy Java stuff out there that like it's maybe tied to struts or camel or things like that you really don't want to be using anymore. And so it's like, why spend all the time to upgrade in place when you could just rewrite it to Spring or rewrite it into a language that people actually want to write or something like that? There is some of that, and that stuff belongs on the board for sure, right? Like you need to do a major refactor to modernize. But the stuff where you're just kind of slowly adding over time, and our data sort of exposes that, it's just about developing the muscle memory. And I remember we said this from a long time ago. We wanted this system to be like your chief of staff for every persona in technology, whether you're the CIO, you're a director level, or your fingers on the keyboards writing code. We wanted you to have butler/chief of staff person who's going to keep you informed, make sure you're focusing on the things that are right things on the high value stuff, and that you had a good way to get the information you need to do your job well. So this is a big milestone in that direction. I'm excited. Thanks for all your work on it. It's been fun to test.
Yeah, it was fun. I learned a lot in that. That was a good one.
I was bugging you about it. Like, hey, I want to test it. I want to test it. I want to test it. It was kind of fun to go back and forth and be the beta tester hardcore on that. So far, it's been very cool, very exciting, and just getting going. This is V1. We'll add a lot more to it. We got some other agent stuff coming that hopefully people will really enjoy as well. We wanted to talk about CLI versus MCP. And
that's been a debate. Yeah, MCP was hot, and then it's lost a little bit of favor. Yeah, we're talking about MCP while MCP might be losing a little bit of favor, but we already had a CLI, and that's where we're just rounding out our pie. We had the extension, we had the CLI. Now we have MCP to get the trifecta of living where the developers are and trying to give everybody the tools that they need to be successful. So that's an ongoing debate. I don't know where that's going to land yet, but I do see the CLIs are becoming really popular because tokens are at a premium right now. And so when you have MCP, it bloats the context. It gives you extra tokens that your agent has to process, which costs money. So the CLIs, you have a little bit more control over that, I think. You give your help commands here and there. It's not all loaded when you load the server by default. So I think the CLIs are here to stay. We'll continue to add to ours, but we'll see where the market goes on it.
It's just another interface, right? That's my perspective on it, right? From a product management standpoint, it's just another interface. For a product like ours, I'm not sure CLI is going to be a super high adoption for these use cases, right? Like we built our CLI originally around automation, right? Like, can you do things like in the pipeline and stuff like that? It was more focused on, it was a RESTful wrapper to help with certain things, right? Obviously, when people are using something like GitHub or something like the AWS CLI, that makes a ton of sense because they're already naturally going to be authenticated with those things while they're doing that work. I like the MCP server as an approach because it's more in the background than the CLI is. But who cares? The opinions don't really matter. Like, let people use what works for their use case.
And our consumers aren't going to be as worried about token counts because they've either built something themselves where tokens are not counted in that sense, or they have a big enterprise plan where also tokens aren't counted. They have the max plan in a way for everybody. You just don't pay by the token. So for that case, it doesn't matter. And so that context that we can ship into the MCP server, that's actually helpful because in that case, tokens are a drop in the bucket compared to the people hours that they'd be saving.
Yeah, I think the people that are obsessed about the token count with MCP are people that are doing a lot of recursive stuff. Like they're people that are super power users.
And they're paying API rates, not subscription rates.
Yes, exactly. So it's all valid. It depends on your context and depends on what matters. I think we'll continue to do it. We have our RESTful APIs. We have our graph APIs that we actually power our experiences with, which are much more bespoke and much more aggregative and all those different things, right? We're not really set up to turn those on for something like an AI bot to talk to.
Oh, there's so much data. Oh my gosh. It's so much data in there.
It's not what I would do. It's like MCP is almost like a hybrid of those two things too, which is pretty interesting. And so it'll be interesting to see how these things evolve. We have a whole reporting ecosystem, for example. How do we make that available to the agent? How do we surface those things in a responsible way, both from a data segregation, like all those things, but also just like, how do you make it not insane to query or blow up our reporting queues or anything like that? It's all pretty interesting. And, obviously we'll take our feedback from our customers as they go and we'll keep on keeping on. But it's a fun time to be doing this work.
It's interesting. Now we can have the full picture. We can now iterate on it. We can start to just really see what these agents can do with a messy environment.
Yeah, no, it's going to be cool. It's going to be great. Awesome. Well, thanks for the time today. Thanks for everybody for sticking with us. Again, if you want to check out the new server, unfortunately, it's not really going to do much for you unless you're a customer. But if you're interested in that, give us a shout. We're happy to talk to you about it. It's on our doc site. You can just kind of see. If you go to docs.devgrid.io, and then there's a big MCP button at the top in the middle, and you can read all about it and see what we're doing. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks, Shay. Talk to you later.
See you.